What happens when a 17-year-old black girl quietly takes her seat in first class and is treated like an intruder? Would the same thing have happened if her skin were lighter, if her clothes were designer, if the name on her ticket had been taken seriously the first time Zariah Monroe wasn't looking for trouble? She boarded Orion Air Flight 1175 with a ticket her father had proudly purchased, one that came with no special treatment, just the same dignity every paying passenger deserves. But by the time the plane reached cruising altitude, Zariah had been pulled from her seat, accused of fraud, and humiliated in front of strangers, simply because she didn't look like she belonged. Here's the twist: Zariah's father, he owns the airline. And when she finally gets the chance to make one call, the skies begin to shake. This is more than a story about injustice. It's a story about standing your ground, about quiet strength, and about what happens when the truth takes flight. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel because you're about to witness one voice that refused to be silenced. Let's begin. Zariah Monroe stood in front of the bathroom mirror, slowly twisting her curls into a loose bun. Her movements were calm, methodical, almost ritualistic. It wasn't about appearance. It was about control. And control, she had learned, was something you clung to tightly when the world was full of people eager to take it from you. It was 6:42 a.m. on a warm spring morning in Atlanta, and her suitcase waited by the front door. Outside, the air smelled like dew and jasmine. Inside, the quiet of the Monroe estate wrapped around her like a silk robe, elegant, comforting, but slightly too heavy. Zariah was 17 days away from turning 18 and flying solo for the first time in months. Destination, San Francisco. The trip was a personal one, sort of. She had been invited to speak at a Youth Innovation Summit. Her dad had suggested a private jet. She'd politely declined. "I want to fly commercial," she'd told him. "First class is enough. I want to feel normal again." Everett Monroe hadn't argued. He rarely did when she spoke with that quiet fire in her voice. He just smiled in that way of his, half proud, half protective, and said, "Orion Air it is." Zariah knew what most people didn't, that her father wasn't just the CEO of Orion Air. He built it literally from the runway up. Raised in Decatur, worked his way through aviation school, started as a baggage handler, climbed through every rung of the ladder until there were none left above him. Now, the company was global. It had won awards for diversity and inclusion. And yet, even inside its cabins, bias still traveled undetected like turbulence in clear skies. Zariah wasn't naive. She didn't advertise her last name. She never flew in designer sweats or $1,000 shoes. This morning, she wore a gray hoodie, slim black jeans, and well-worn Converse sneakers. Her carry-on was small and neat, with a leather-bound journal tucked inside a gift from her mother before she passed. The journal had one of her favorite quotes written on the first page. "Softness is not weakness. It's resistance in the gentlest form." Her phone buzzed. A text from Amari Chen lit up the screen. "Amari, you at the airport yet? Send gate selfie when you do LOL. And breathe." Zariah smiled. Amari knew her well. She didn't love flying. Not because of the height or the takeoff, but because of what came with being a black girl in first class. The stares, the questions, the moments where your ID got double-checked and someone mistakenly assumed you were headed to coach. Her father once told her, "When people don't think you belong, you'll feel it long before they say it. That's not your fault. That's the air they carry, not the weight you should hold." He had tried to prepare her, but there were some lessons you had to learn at 35,000 feet. Zariah arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport with time to spare. She moved through security with practiced grace. TSA officers greeted her with indifferent politeness. She said thank you, even when they didn't. At the Orion Air check-in counter, the agent asked her for ID twice. She didn't flinch, didn't roll her eyes, just handed it over with a polite smile and locked the discomfort deep in a place she'd labeled expected. The terminal buzzed with the usual morning chaos, families rushing with strollers, business travelers glued to Bluetooth calls, and airport announcements echoing above like an omnipresent narrator. Zariah found her gate, D14, and took a seat near the window. The Boeing 777 that would carry her across the country gleamed in the early sun, its Orion Air logo catching light like a badge of honor. She pulled out her journal and jotted down a few lines. A flight is never just a flight. It's a test of who you are and who the world insists you're not. She didn't know yet just how true that sentence would become. When the gate agent announced boarding for first class, Zariah stood, adjusted her hoodie, and approached the counter. That's when the man behind the podium, Cameron Hale, his nameplate said, looked at her with a narrowed gaze. Not rude, but not right either. The way someone might look at a teenager who walked into a members-only club with no invitation. Zariah smiled, handed over her boarding pass, and said, "Good morning." Cameron didn't smile back. "Are you sure you're in the right lane?" Zariah kept her voice steady. "Yes, seat 2A. He scanned her pass, paused a beat longer than necessary, then handed it back. "All right," he said, but it came out flat. No enjoy your flight, no eye contact, just a tight-lipped dismissal. Zariah felt a familiar chill settle in her chest. She had boarded hundreds of flights in her life, but today something felt off. As she stepped down the jet bridge, she whispered to herself, "Don't let it in. Not yet." She didn't know that before this flight landed. The world would know her name. The moment Zariah stepped into the first-class cabin of Orion Air Flight 1175, she could feel Itan energy shift so subtle. Most people would miss it, but she felt it. She always did. The air was cooler, quieter. The leather seats gleamed under soft ambient lighting. Classical music played faintly from hidden speakers, the kind meant to soothe high-powered executives and frequent flyers. A tray of fresh orange slices and eucalyptus-scented towels rested near the entrance. A tall flight attendant in her mid-40s, brunette bob tucked neatly under her hat, gave a tight smile. Her name tag read, Tanya Blake. "Welcome aboard," Tanya said, her tone oddly formal. "Let me see your boarding pass." Zariah offered it, still holding her journal in her other hand. Tanya barely glanced at it before her eyes settled on Zariah's face. "Seat 2A, Tanya repeated, eyebrows slightly arched. "Yes," Zariah replied, gently. There was a pause. A brief flicker of something unreadable passed over Tanya's face. Then, a crisp nod. "This way." Zariah followed her down the aisle. The cabin had only 8 seats, 2 per row, separated by wide armrests and personal partitions. A man in a Navy sports coat was already reclining in 1B, flipping through a print edition of the Wall Street Journal. He didn't look up. As she reached her seat, Zariah placed her carry-on in the overhead bin and sat down, slowly, tucking her journal into the seat pocket. She took a moment to breathe. She reminded herself that she belonged here no matter what the look said. Tanya returned a few minutes later with a warm towel. She handed it to Zariah, her expression blank. "Would you like sparkling water or orange juice before takeoff? Orange juice, please." "Thank you." Tanya nodded and left. Zariah let out a long breath and reached for her phone. A new message from Amari. "Amari, you board yet first-class life, treating you like a queen or a suspect." Zariah smirked and typed back quickly, "Zariah, somewhere in between." "You know how it goes." She hit send and turned on airplane mode just as Tanya returned with her drink. The attendant placed it carefully on the tray table and offered a strained enjoy, then disappeared again. Zariah sipped the juice slowly. The cold sweetness was welcome, but the tightness in her chest didn't ease. She glanced around the cabin. Every other passenger looked right, polished, older, white, or racially ambiguous. One woman wore pearls and beige cashmere. A man across the aisle was already tapping away on a MacBook, his cufflinks catching the light. Everyone seemed wrapped in a certain type of silence, polite, transactional, accustomed. No one made direct eye contact, but Zariah could feel their attention. She always could. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, trying to center herself. She thought about the conference ahead, the keynote she'd give on youth-led innovation, how her father would be watching the live stream from his office, how proud her mom would have been. Just get through the flight, she told herself. You've done this before. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. Good morning, folks. This is Captain Julian Reese. We're just waiting on final clearance and expect a smooth, direct flight to San Francisco. Buckle up and enjoy the ride. Zariah fastened her seatbelt and peered out the window. The tarmac shimmered in the morning sun. A baggage cart zipped by. A child waved from another plane's window across the runway. As the cabin door shut with a mechanical click, Tanya walked down the aisle for final checks. When she passed Zariah's row, her eyes lingered just for a second. Zariah turned to the window again. She wasn't sure if she felt paranoid or perceptive, maybe both. 20 minutes after takeoff, the seatbelt sign turned off with a gentle ding. The flight smoothed into cruise altitude, and the cabin lights dimmed slightly. Zariah tried to distract herself with the in-flight entertainment screen. She picked a documentary about coral reefs, something quiet, beautiful, distant. But as she scrolled, she caught movement in her peripheral vision. Tanya was speaking with another crew member near the galley, a younger flight attendant, black, early 30s maybe, athletic build, name tag reading Deshaun Klein. As they talked, their eyes flicked toward her. Zariah pretended not to notice, but her grip on the armrest tightened slightly. Were they talking about her? No. That would be ridiculous. Right. Her stomach gave a small twist. She had learned not to jump to conclusions, to give people the benefit of the doubt, but she also knew how racism worked, how it didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered, in dress codes, in stares, in pauses between sentences, in the slight rise of an eyebrow when you said 2A. Zariah took a deep breath and reached for her journal. She opened to a fresh page and began to write. There are rooms where your presence makes people nervous, not because you're loud, but because your existence challenges what they expect to see. She put her pen down and stared ahead. This wasn't about juice, or seating charts, or tone. This was about power, assumption, and whether or not the world still decided who belonged where based on skin, not a boarding pass. The coral reef documentary flickered silently on screen. Zariah leaned back in her seat and whispered to herself, I hope I'm wrong. But something in her gut told her she wasn't. The hum of the engines was like a lullaby, steady, soothing, but Zariah's nerves buzzed with an entirely different rhythm. She had been in the air for just under 40 minutes, cruising somewhere above Tennessee, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was under quiet surveillance. A whisper here, a glance there. It was like walking through a room full of mirrors that didn't reflect her back the same way they did everyone else. Tanya passed by again, pushing the lunch cart now. She offered warm bread to the man in 1B and called him Mr. Ellison. Then, stopping at Zariah's row, her smile dimmed. Chicken or vegetarian? Miss Tanya asked. Zariah looked up. Vegetarian. Please. Tanya hesitated for half a breath longer than necessary, just enough for Zariah to catch. She reached down, retrieved the tray, and placed it in front of her wordlessly. No sparkling water. Zariah asked, gently. "Oh." Tanya blinked. "I'll bring it." Her voice didn't carry malice, but it lacked warmth. Every interaction felt clipped, cold, not overtly hostile but off, somehow, like something unspoken hung in the air between them. Zariah looked across the aisle, watching as Tanya chatted easily with another passenger, middle-aged white woman wearing Chanel earrings. They laughed over the dessert option. It felt casual. Comfortable. Zariah glanced at her untouched tray. She'd long stopped expecting fairness in these environments. But this still stung. A soft voice drew her back. "You good," Zariah turned. It was Deshaun Klein, the younger flight attendant she'd seen earlier. He knelt slightly beside her row, careful not to make a scene. His voice was low, kind. She offered a tight smile. "I'm okay." He looked at her longer than a passing glance should allow, his expression saying what his words didn't. "I saw what she did. I see what's happening. If you need anything, just hit the button." "All right," he added. Zariah nodded, eyes softening. "Thanks." When he walked away, she looked down at her food again. Her appetite had vanished. The cold stares, the awkward pauses, the gate agent's initial scrutiny, it all started to thread together like beads on a wire. Something was coming. She didn't know what, but her instincts were rarely wrong. She closed her eyes, leaned back into the seat, and tried to focus on her breath. Inhale. Exhale. She pictured her father's voice, deep, deliberate, always with a touch of calm authority. "You were born into a world that wasn't built with you in mind, but you are not here to fit into it. You are here to shape it." That had been his mantra when she was little, repeated after scraped knees, after playground side-eyes, after the first time a teacher assumed she was in the wrong math class. She had shaped herself to endure gracefully, quietly, powerfully, but even steel bends under enough pressure. She cracked open her journal again and scribbled, "Sometimes the silence hurts louder than words. You're not kicked, just quietly uninvited." As she wrote, movement caught her eye. Tanya was back at the galley, speaking with Cameron Hale, the gate agent. Zariah blinked in confusion. Why is he on board? Gate agents almost never traveled with the flights they boarded. Unless... Her stomach twisted. Was he checking on something? They kept their voices low, but their eyes kept flicking toward her seat. Tanya's arms were crossed. Cameron looked tense. Deshaun walked up, said something to them, quiet but urgent. Tanya replied curtly, brushing him off. Cameron folded his arms like he was doubling down on whatever concern he carried on board. Zariah didn't want to jump to conclusions, but her skin itched, not physically, spiritually, like her body knew danger before her brain did. She tapped her fingers nervously on the tray, reached for her phone, only to remember it was in airplane mode. Her anxiety began to speak up in her head. Are they doubting your ticket? Your ID? Do they think you don't belong here, or do they already know who you are and just don't care? Maybe it wasn't about her name. Maybe it was about her skin, her hoodie. The fact that she didn't walk on board with a Louis Vuitton duffel and false eyelashes. Maybe she was too plain, too unapologetically herself. But that wasn't wrong. She wasn't wrong. Still, the doubts tugged at her. Should I have worn something more classy? Should I have dropped my last name when I boarded? Should I have been more prepared for this? She hated that these thoughts even existed in her mind. But when you were a black girl in a white-coated space, they were part of survival. She took a long, slow breath, then reached for her backpack, pulling out her tablet. She opened the email her father had forwarded weeks ago, the ticket confirmation, itinerary, and personal note he'd typed below. Proud of you, Zed. First class isn't a privilege. It's your seat, because you earned it. Never shrink to make others comfortable. Zariah stared at the words until her chest stopped tightening. She had everything she needed proof, presence, and pride. She just hoped she wouldn't need to use them all before landing. As she tucked the tablet away, Tanya walked past once more. This time, she didn't say anything. She just looked down at Zariah, at her seat, then away again, as if measuring something that wasn't hers to measure. Zariah clenched her fists just slightly under the blanket and whispered to herself, "They're watching me, but I see them too." And for the first time on the flight, she didn't feel scared. She felt ready. It started with a tap on the shoulder. Zariah turned to find Tanya standing beside her row again, arms crossed this time. Her expression wasn't harsh, but it was hollow, as if something had already been decided behind her eyes. "Miss Monroe," she said evenly, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" Zariah blinked, startled by the formality. The woman hadn't bothered to learn her name earlier. Now she was using it like it belonged in a police file. "Is something wrong?" Zariah asked, trying to keep her voice light. Tanya offered a tight-lipped smile. "We just need to verify something. You can bring your personal items." Zariah's fingers froze around her blanket. Across the aisle, the woman in Chanel glanced over, then quickly looked away. Passengers nearby subtly leaned back in their seats or adjusted their headphones, pretending not to listen while obviously doing just that. Zariah slowly reached down, picked up her tablet and journal, and stood. Tanya led her toward the galley, where Cameron Haleth Gate agent was already waiting. Deshawn stood near them, hands in his pockets, his jaw clenched. He didn't meet her eyes. She could see something hard boiling beneath his usually calm expression. Cameron greeted her with a stiff nod. "Miss Monroe," he said, gesturing toward a narrow jump seat in the galley area. "Please have a seat." Zariah didn't sit. Her instinct screamed against making herself smaller. "I'd prefer to stand," she replied. Cameron seemed irritated by that, but didn't press the issue. "We've run into a concern," he said. "There's been a discrepancy with your ticket and payment method. Specifically, the credit card used doesn't match the name on your ID." Zariah's stomach turned, but her expression didn't waver. "That's because the ticket was purchased by my father," she said. "Everett Monroe." Cameron raised an eyebrow. "And you're saying you're related to Mr. Everett Monroe, CEO of Orion Air?" She heard the skepticism dripping from his voice like a leaky faucet. Zariah's voice stayed calm. "Yes, I'm his daughter," Tanya scoffed under her breath. Cameron didn't hide his doubt. "We don't have any notification from corporate or VIP flags in the system," he said. Zariah tightened her grip on her journal. "I didn't ask for special treatment. I just asked to be treated like any other first-class passenger." Tanya stepped forward. "You don't have a credit card in your name. You're a minor. You didn't check in with a parent. That raises flags." Zariah turned to Deshawn, who was still standing silently nearby. "Is this standard protocol?" she asked him. Deshawn hesitated. "No," he admitted, finally meeting her eyes. "This doesn't usually happen unless someone is flagged before boarding." Tanya glared at him, but Zariah's attention remained fixed on Cameron. "I have the booking confirmation and the email from my father. I can show you right now." Cameron held up a hand. "That's not necessary at the moment. We're simply verifying identity." Zariah laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "I gave you my ID. I gave you my boarding pass. I've been quiet, respectful, cooperative. What exactly are you trying to verify?" Cameron's tone hardened. "Miss, I'd ask you to lower your voice." Zariah's voice wasn't raised, but her presence now was unmistakable. "I'm not raising my voice," she said, eyes narrowing. "You just didn't expect me to speak." Tanya stepped in, trying to regain control. "We're offering you the chance to avoid complications by just moving to economy while we sort this out." Zariah blinked. "You're asking me to move out of my paid seat in first class because you don't believe my identity." "No one said that," Cameron replied quickly. "But that's what you're doing," she said, heart thudding. "You're accusing me without evidence. You're assuming guilt because I don't look like I belong here." The galley air felt thinner somehow, as if the pressure had shifted mid-flight. Tanya's voice grew sharp. "Miss Monroe, if you refuse to comply, we may have to escalate this matter further. Either you cooperate or we take necessary steps to maintain security." "Security?" Zariah said, incredulous. "You think I'm a security threat?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Zariah stared at them. Her body was calm, but inside, her heart throbbed against her ribs like a fist against a locked door. She looked at Deshawn. "Please," she said, voice lower now. "Let me call my father. That's all I'm asking." "You're not allowed to use voice calls while in the air," Cameron said immediately. "I can show you the text thread, or an email, or you can call corporate. Someone there can verify me, Miss Monroe." Tanya interrupted. "We're going to ask you one last time to cooperate and change seats." Zariah didn't move, and then Cameron reached forward and grabbed her elbow. It was sudden, not violent, but firm, possessive. Zariah yanked her arm back instinctively. "Don't touch me." Her voice cracked now, not from panic but fury. Passengers peeked from behind curtains. Someone gasped audibly. Deshawn stepped between them. "Hey, stop," he said, eyes wide. "You can't touch her like that. She's being non-compliant." Cameron barked. "She's a teenager." Deshawn snapped back. "You're escalating for no reason." Tanya leaned toward a comm panel. "I'm calling the cockpit." Zariah stepped back, chest heaving. She could feel her control slipping, her father's words echoing like a distant lighthouse trying to guide her through a storm she didn't ask for. "Never let them pull you out of yourself. Even when they try to drag you down." "I'm calling him," she said softly. "No, you're not." Cameron said. Zariah met his gaze, steel in her spine. "Yes," she said, voice like a lit match. "I am. Let go of me." Zariah's voice cracked through the tight corridor of the galley. The grip on her arm Cameron's wasn't violent, but it was deliberate, firm, possessive. The kind of touch that says, "You don't have a say here." Passengers sitting nearby began to stir. One woman gasped. A man halfway through a conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Curtains twitched. Cameron didn't release her. "You're resisting," he said, as if narrating her into a report. "I'm not resisting," Zariah said through gritted teeth, her voice controlled but shaking with fury. "I'm asking you not to put your hands on me. Miss Monroe, please calm down," Tanya said sharply, stepping forward. "We're trying to handle this with discretion." "Discretion," Zariah snapped, eyes wide. "You've pulled me out of my seat, dragged me in front of strangers, accused me of stealing my own ticket, and now you're touching me without consent." Deshawn moved quickly between them. "Back up," he said to Cameron. "You need to let her go." Cameron's jaw tightened. She's creating a disturbance. She's standing her ground. Passengers in the first-class cabin were no longer pretending not to watch. Some had pulled out phones, others simply stared, eyes flicking between the crew and the girl standing there, back straight, voice steady, but visibly shaking. A voice came from across the aisle. "She doesn't look like a threat to me." Zariah looked over. A middle-aged Latina woman, Elena Rivera, was seated in 3C, phone resting in her lap, camera pointed in their direction. Her brow was furrowed, her voice low but sharp. Maybe instead of manhandling her, "You should call your supervisor. "We're at cruising altitude." "Ma'am," Tanya said stiffly, "we're following protocol." "No, you're following a pattern," Elena replied coolly. Zariah's heart was thudding. Her arm still stung where Cameron had grabbed her. But something stronger was bubbling inside now, anger. Yes, but also clarity. A sense that this moment wasn't just about her, that this had happened to others, that someone needed to say enough. "Let me call my father," Zariah said again, staring directly at Tanya now. "You're not authorized to use voice functions in flight," Tanya said. "I'll use the Wi-Fi to send a message. You don't have access. I'll pay for it." Tanya opened her mouth to object again, but a voice broke through the speaker system before she could. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reese. We've received a report of an onboard disturbance. We ask that passengers remain seated while the crew assesses the situation." Zariah's face flushed. Now it was official. The captain. The word disturbance, as if she were a problem. As if standing up for yourself was a threat. Cameron stepped forward again. "You'll need to be reseated in the rear of the aircraft until we sort this out." The rear. Dragged from first class like a trespasser, Zariah didn't move. "No." Tanya tensed. "Miss Monroe." "No," Zariah said again, firmer now. "This is my seat. My father booked it for me. I have my ID. I have my confirmation. You're not moving me. Not unless you physically force me, and if you do, trust me, every phone in this cabin is recording." She turned slightly, scanning the cabin. Phones were out. Eyes were locked. A man in 1A stood up slowly. His voice was calm, but powerful. "I'm an attorney," he said, "and from what I've observed, this passenger has done absolutely nothing to warrant being removed from her seat. If you touch her again, you open yourselves and this airline to serious legal consequences." Tanya's face went pale. Cameron blinked, clearly flustered. "This isn't a legal issue. It's a security matter." Elena Rivera scoffed. "Your security matter looks a lot like profiling." Zariah stood still, chest rising and falling. She looked around the cabinot for permission, but for witnesses. And then she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "My name is Zariah Monroe. My father is Everett Monroe, founder and CEO of Orion Air. I didn't want to use his name. I didn't want to be treated differently. But I'm being harassed, dragged, threatened, and you're all watching it happen." A silence fell, thick and electric. Even Tanya looked shaken now. Deshawn stepped forward. "We need to call corporate," he said to Tanya. "Now." Tanya didn't respond. But Cameron, he turned away. And for the first time since the plane had taken off, Zariah saw something shift in his posture. Not embarrassment, not shame. Just fear of being wrong, of being recorded, of being caught. Zariah slowly stepped back into the aisle. She held her bruised arm against her chest and faced the cabin. "Please," she said, "I just want to call my father." She was no longer asking for permission. Deshawn stepped to the front of the cabin, picked up the in-flight phone, and made the call to the cockpit. "Captain," he said, "we need clearance to contact Orion Air headquarters. We have a passenger issue that's escalating fast." He turned to Zariah. "I'll get someone on the line." Zariah exhaled, tears burning at the edge of her eyes, not because she was weak, but because she had stood this long without being believed, because it took this much proof to matter, because dignity, even now, had to be demanded. Tanya stepped aside. Cameron didn't speak, and the cabinot's quiet, composed. Elite sat in a hush that felt very different now. Zariah returned to her seat, arm aching, throat dry, but she was still standing inside. The cabin felt colder now, not because of the temperature, but because of what had just unfolded. Zariah sat back in her seat, cradling her arm and staring blankly ahead, as if the plane's walls could absorb her rage, her fear, her stubborn refusal to shrink. Her mind buzzed with everything that had happened in the last 15 minutes. Cameron's grip, Tanya's insinuations, the hesitation in Deshawn's eyes, the quiet but fierce voices of strangers who had stood up for her, the lawyer, the woman in 3C. And yet, even after all that, even with her identity clearly stated, Everett Monroe's daughter, there was still no call, no resolution, just delay. Deshawn reappeared from the front of the cabin, phone in hand, his expression tight with frustration. "I spoke with the captain," he said quietly, leaning near Zariah. He contacted the flight deck's corporate relay line. "They're going to try and get someone from Orion's exec team on the line, but it might take time." Zariah nodded. "Did you say it was about me? I told them everything I could without setting off alarms," he replied. "But corporate protocol's slow. I'm sorry." She swallowed hard. "Can I call my dad directly?" He winced. "Technically, no. Not while we're in the air. Even with Wi-Fi, voice calls are restricted. I don't care if it's a FaceTime, a voicemail, a scribbled napkin," she said. "I need him to know what's happening." Deshawn crouched lower, his voice dropping. "They're watching us now. Tanya's trying to save face. Cameron's hiding in the back. But if you try to break rules even just a little, they'll twist it." Zariah gritted her teeth. "So, I have to follow the rules while they twist them against me." He didn't answer. That was the answer. Behind her, the low murmur of first class resumed. People were whispering, pretending to scroll through emails while watching. She heard the snap of a phone camera, the soft hum of a text being typed. Someone muttered the word lawsuit. Her phone buzzed in her pocket barely. She risked a glance. "A merry girl. You're trending." Zariah's stomach dropped. "Amari. Someone recorded it. You're all over Twitter. It's under Orion Flight 1175. She wanted to feel relief, vindication, but instead, a sick unease twisted inside her. She hadn't asked to go viral. She hadn't asked to become a symbol. She just wanted a seat, a quiet ride, a trip her father had gifted her with pride. And now the whole world was watching her humiliation unfold. She tucked her phone away, leaned back in her seat. Tanya walked by, moving stiffly like someone on a thin rope. She paused by Zariah's row, but didn't say anything. Didn't even look her in the eyes. Just kept walking. Zariah felt heat rising behind her eyes, but she blinked it away. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She wouldn't let them mistake her pain for weakness. She turned toward the window and let her forehead rest against the glass. "Breathe. Don't break. You are more than this moment." A few minutes passed. Then, Lindeth, most senior attendant on board, whom Zariah hadn't met, yet approached her quietly. Older, with silver-streaked hair and a soft but serious expression, she crouched slightly and spoke with the careful tone of someone used to managing disasters. "Miss Monroe," she said gently, "I want you to know I've reviewed the situation." Zariah met her gaze, and Linda sighed. "We're working on getting your father on the phone, but it's not a fast process midair." "I understand," Zariah said, "but I need it to be, because while this plane cruises along like nothing's happened, I've been bruised, humiliated, and treated like a criminal in front of 24 strangers." Linda nodded. "I agree. I'm sorry. I wasn't made aware until recently. I'm the lead on this flight, and this never should have happened under my watch." Zariah's voice dropped. "They still don't believe me, do they?" Linda hesitated. "They're afraid of being wrong, and afraid of what it means if you're right." Zariah looked down at her lap. "I had proof. I had receipts. But it wasn't enough." Linda gently placed a hand on the headrest beside her. "Sometimes the system doesn't want proof. It wants control." There was a pause. Zariah looked up, her voice tight. "Can I use the crew phone?" Linda bit her lip. "Technically, no. But I'm going to speak to the captain again. This is above policy now." Zariah offered a faint nod, exhausted but grateful. "Thank you." Linda squeezed her shoulder briefly, then disappeared toward the front. Zariah glanced at the passengers again. Some gave her encouraging looks. Others avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable. And a few like the man in 2B, who hadn't spoken once, just stared with the hollow indifference of someone used to watching discomfort without intervening. She picked up her journal, flipped to a clean page, and wrote, "They say stay calm, but what they mean is stay silent. They say cooperate, but what they mean is concede. They say prove it, but what they mean is make us believe, even when we've already decided not to." She set the pen down. Out the window, the clouds rolled by like ghost cities, quiet and untouchable. Zariah leaned back again, and for the first time since the flight began, she didn't feel like a passenger. She felt like evidence. Zariah hadn't spoken in nearly 15 minutes. The cabin, once humming with veiled tension, had settled into a wary calm, but under the surface it buzzed like a live wire quiet, coiled, waiting. Linda had not returned yet. Tanya kept her distance now, making deliberate rounds through first class like nothing had happened, offering drinks with a hollow smile, and avoiding Zariah's row entirely. Cameron Hale was nowhere to be seen. Zariah assumed he was buried in the rear galley, avoiding the cameras, the glares, and, most of all, the consequences. She stared at the same cloud bank outside the window, one she could have sworn had been there an hour ago, still and unmoving, like time had paused just long enough to stretch out her shame. Until a whisper drifted from across the aisle. "Hey." Zariah turned. It was the lawyer in 1/8 a tall man with silver hair and a navy linen shirt who had spoken up earlier during the confrontation. He leaned slightly toward the aisle now, his voice low but direct. "I meant what I said," he told her. "They lay one more hand on you. They're going to need a defense team bigger than the plane." Zariah blinked, caught off guard, then managed a small, tired smile. "Thanks." He nodded once. "Serious. They're out of line. I've seen discrimination play out 100 different ways. But this," he shook his head, "this was blatant." Behind him, a woman leaned forward, the same one who had spoken earlier, Elena Rivera. She lowered her voice, eyes warm. "I posted the video," she whispered. "You're trending in 6 states." Zariah swallowed. "I didn't want to go viral." "I know," Elena said gently. "But maybe it's not just about you anymore." Zariah didn't respond. She couldn't yet. She felt pulled in 2 directions. Part of her wanted to disappear into the seat, curl into the smallest version of herself, and pretend none of this had happened. But another part, bigger, louder, wanted to stand up again, to keep standing until someone couldn't ignore it anymore. Her fingers itched to write again, to put it somewhere. But her body was still tired, still bruised in more ways than one. Across the cabin, a soft voice said, "Excuse me." Zariah looked up. A young black girl, maybe 13, peered from row 4D with wide eyes and the hint of a hopeful smile. She had box braids and a denim jacket covered in pins NASA. Harriet Tubman, Toni Morrison. She held a phone in her lap and mouthed, "Is that really your dad?" Zariah hesitated, then nodded slowly. The girl's eyes lit up like a spark. Her mother gently touched her shoulder, as if to say, "Not now." But Zariah gave her a subtle thumbs up, and the girl beamed. She turned back toward the window, blinking hard. It hit her then. This wasn't just a personal nightmare anymore. She had stepped into something bigger, something heavier, Her pain was now someone else's lesson, someone else's courage. And that, more than anything, scared her. Because what if she said the wrong thing? What if she cracked? What if she let them win? After all this, Linda returned just as Zariah was wiping at the corners of her eyes with the side of her thumb. The lead attendant moved quickly, discreetly, and knelt again beside her seat. Corporate connected me to the CEO's executive office. She whispered. Zariah sat up straighter, heart leaping. My father. They're trying to reach him directly, Linda said. They've verified your name, your relationship, and they're now patching a direct line to Mr. Monroe himself. Zariah exhaled, half relief, half fear. What happens now? She asked. Linda looked toward the front of the cabin where the intercom handset rested. We make the call, and when we do, I'll let him hear from you directly. Zariah's hands trembled slightly. Will you stay with me? Linda nodded the whole time. Zariah looked toward the aisle. Tanya stood halfway down the cabin, staring at her with a mixture of disbelief and dread. I think they really didn't expect this, Zariah whispered. Linda followed her gaze. That's the problem, she said. They never expect to be called out by the ones they underestimate. Zariah leaned back, breath slow, chest steady. A quiet strength began knitting itself back inside her, stitch by stitch. Deshawn approached next, offering a small smile. He handed her a bottle of water. I saw what you wrote, he said under his breath. Zariah blinked. My journal. He nodded. When you put it down earlier, the page was open for a second. The line about silence and proof. She tensed slightly, unsure how to respond. He placed the bottle on her tray table. Just wanted to say, I hear you. For real. Then he was gone, returning to the front. Zariah stared at the bottle. Her throat was dry, but she didn't move. Her mind felt suspended between who she'd been when the flight began and who she was becoming, right there in seat 2A. The girl in 4D waved again, this time with a fist held quietly over her heart. Zariah nodded back. Zariah, it's time. Linda's voice was quiet, reverent, like she knew the weight this moment carried. Zariah rose slowly from her seat, the aisle stretching before her like a runway. Every eye in first class followed her steps, silent and heavy. No one whispered now. The spectacle had become something more, something sacred. The flight deck phone was built into a small wall panel beside the galley door, shielded by a privacy partition. Linda stood by as she lifted the receiver and pressed it gently to her ear. There was a hum, then a click. A woman's voice, calm and efficient, spoke first. Miss Monroe, this is Marcia, executive assistant to Mr. Everett Monroe. He's on the line now. Zariah didn't even have time to respond, because then she heard him. Zariah. Her breath caught in her throat. Just hearing her father's voice, measured, rich with emotion, made something in her unravel. Dad, she said, barely louder than a whisper. There was a pause on the other end. Then, are you safe? Tears burned behind her eyes. I think so. What happened? Zariah inhaled slowly. They pulled me out of my seat, said the credit card name didn't match, said I had no proof. They tried to move me to the back of the plane. One of them grabbed my arm. Dad, no one believed me. Silence. Not the empty kind, but the charged kind. The kind right before thunder splits open the sky. Then came his voice again. This time, different. What's the name of the flight attendant who touched you? Cameron Hale, she replied, gate agent. He boarded the flight. And the crew member who accused you, Tanya Blake. And who's with you now, Linda Harris. She believed me. She helped? Zariah heard rustling on the other end, papers moving, maybe the sound of a door shutting. Zariah! Listen to me, Everett said. You did everything right. You held your ground. You stayed calm. I'm so proud of you. Her chest tightened. I didn't want to use your name. I didn't want this to be because of who you are. Everett exhaled, and his voice softened. This isn't about who I am. This is about what they assumed you weren't. She gripped the phone harder. I'm contacting the captain directly, he said. Linda will stay with you. Do not speak to Cameron or Tanya again. I've already informed Legal Moscoms and our safety team. We are treating this as a corporate crisis. You are not alone, and this is not over. Zariah blinked rapidly. Dad. Yes, thank you. Another pause. This one warm. I'll see you at SFO, he said. They'll escort you off the plane. Press may be waiting. You don't have to say a word until you're ready. I'll be there. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. The line clicked. Linda gently took the phone and returned it to the panel. He's already on another call, she murmured. The captain's expecting him. Zariah stepped back, her legs weak but not from fear, from release. It was over. This part was over. Now came the rest. As she walked slowly back to her seat, the passengers in first class sat a little straighter. The woman in 3C gave her a slow nod. The attorney in 1A offered a look of quiet affirmation. Even the girl in 4D clapped just once before her mom hushed her with a smile. Tanya stood frozen near the curtain to economy, her arms at her side, eyes flickering with something like panic. She opened her mouth to speak, but Zariah walked past her without a glance. Linda stopped her with a light touch on the elbow. I'm so sorry, she said softly. Zariah turned to her. I know, she replied. Thank you for listening. Deshawn appeared a few moments later, handing her a fresh bottle of water and a blanket. Company's going to know your name by the time we land, he said, with a hint of a smile. They already do, Zariah replied. She sat down again in 2A. For the first time since boarding, she truly felt the space around her, the headrest that was hers, the armrest that was hers, the sky outside hers too. She picked up her journal and wrote, One voice isn't always heard, but one voice, backed by truth and caught on video, becomes something they can't ignore. Passengers around her began to speak more freely now. Unbelievable, someone murmured. I hope she sues them. Another whispered, God, if that was my daughter. The tide had turned. Zariah didn't need the apologies. She didn't need the explanations. What she wanted was acknowledgement, accountability, and it was already unfolding at 35,000 feet. She leaned back, closed her eyes, let herself exhale finally. Outside the window, the clouds had shifted, thinner now, sunlight cutting through them in slants of gold. Linda returned once more before stepping into the cockpit. The captain would like to speak to Mr. Monroe directly, she said. They're coordinating now. You'll be notified when we're preparing to land. You'll exit first. Zariah nodded, and, for the first time in hours, she smiled, not because it was over, but because it was just beginning. The cabin was quieter now, but not with fear. The hush that had fallen was the kind born of awareness. Everyone had seen the shift happen. One moment, Zariah Monroe had been doubted, silenced, manhandled. The next, she had been heard, confirmed, and backed by the most powerful voice in the company. And now, that voice was calling the cockpit. Zariah sat in 2A, wrapped in a Navy Orion Air blanket, her fingers resting lightly on her journal. Her water bottle, half empty, sat untouched. She didn't feel thirsty anymore. She felt awake. She felt anchored. Linda re-emerged from the cockpit 10 minutes later, face unreadable, but steady. "Mr. Monroe spoke to the captain," she said, addressing the crew in front of several watching passengers. "There will be a full investigation. Cameron Hale and Tanya Blake are to cease all interaction with passengers immediately and prepare for debriefing upon landing." Tanya's face drained of color. Cameron, who had returned to hover near the galley, stiffened visibly. "You're punishing us," he said, almost laughing. "For doing our jobs." Linda didn't blink. "You've been relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Please return to the service area." "This is absurd," Cameron muttered. Passengers stirred. A few even murmured in disbelief, not at the order, but at him. The man who had grabbed a teenage girl mid-flight and was now stunned that the system he once leaned on no longer leaned his way. Zariah turned in her seat just enough to look him in the eye. Calm. Still. She didn't say a word. And that, somehow, unsettled him more than if she had shouted. Tanya, to her credit, didn't argue. She stepped aside and disappeared into the rear galley, her posture bent and movements mechanical like someone walking toward the inevitable. Linda glanced at Deshawn and nodded once, a silent passing of the baton. Deshawn stepped forward, now the acting lead for the cabin. His voice was even but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, addressing first class, "we'd like to thank you for your patience. The crew is adjusting assignments, but our service will continue. Should you have any concerns, please direct them to myself or Ms. Harris." There was a beat of silence. Then, unexpectedly, someone began to clap. It was Elena Rivera. The sound echoed soft at first, hesitant, but others joined in. The lawyer, a young couple in 2C. Even the girl in 4D tapped her palms together with gleeful insistence. The applause wasn't loud, but it was clear. It was solidarity, unmistakable and public. Zariah flushed not from embarrassment, but from something else entirely. A strange, humble weight in her chest. Not pride, but relief. For once, the room this rarefied, quiet, glass-ceilinged room was with her. As the cabin calmed again, Linda returned to Zariah's side. "Your father would like to speak again when you're ready," she said. Zariah nodded. "Give me a minute." Linda smiled gently and stepped away. Zariah turned to her window and finally let the tears fall, not out of fear, not out of defeat, but because she was exhausted. It's over, she thought, but she knew it wasn't. Not really, because while justice had shown up, it had been late, and only after she'd been bruised, only after her voice had cracked, only after cameras had rolled and a name had been dropped. And what if she hadn't been Zariah Monroe? What if she were just a girl? Quiet, polite, no famous last name. What if she were someone they could erase without consequence? She knew the answer, and it broke her heart. She wiped her face and looked down at her journal. Opened it slowly. Wrote without hesitation. Justice that only answers to power isn't justice. It's image control. But justice that shows up late is still better than justice that never comes. She closed the book. When Linda handed her the receiver a few minutes later, Everett Monroe's voice was clearer, calmer. "I'm on speaker with our general counsel," he said, "and our head of customer experience. They've been briefed." Zariah sat up. What happens now? Everett didn't hesitate. Upon landing, Tanya and Cameron will be met by HR and legal. They'll be removed from the schedule pending disciplinary action. There will be a full public statement issued within 24 hours. Zariah swallowed. "And me, you'll be escorted off the plane through a secure route. Press has caught the video already. You're trending everywhere." But I want you to decide how this plays out. Zariah blinked. Me, I can keep you out of it. Or I can support you if you want to speak, but I won't speak for you, not unless you ask me to. Zariah didn't respond right away. She looked around the cabin, saw Elena giving her a knowing look, the attorney typing on his phone, the girl in 4D still watching like she was seeing her own future unfold. No, Zariah said finally. I'll speak. I just want to do it right. Her father exhaled with pride. You already are. By the time Orion Air Flight 1175 began its descent into San Francisco, the story had already left the plane. On the ground, phones buzzed with push alerts. Black teen removed from first-class seat on Orion flight, but she's the CEO's daughter. Justice for Zariah trending worldwide. Passenger footage shows gate agent and crew confronting teen mid-flight. In the air, Zariah sat in 2A, composed but far from calm. Her thoughts were everywhere flashing between the bruising grip of Cameron Hale, her father's voice in her ear, and the quiet girl in 4D who had stared at her like she was a lighthouse in a storm. Her journal was open on her lap. She had stopped writing pages ago. Her pen now rested inside the spine. She didn't need to write anymore. Everyone else was writing for her. Linda approached gently. We're beginning final descent. After we land, please remain seated. You'll be the last to deplane. A security team will escort you through a private terminal. Zariah nodded, eyes focused ahead. Deshawn gave her a reassuring glance as he made a round through the cabin. Tanya and Cameron hadn't been seen since mid-flight, now sequestered in the crew quarters, under order. Even the captain had gone quiet professional, courteous, but distant. A man trying to land a plane under the weight of scandal. As the wheels touched down with a loud screech and a rolling rumble, Zariah's heart raced. This was it, the moment when everything would shift from private pain to public truth. Passengers began to stand. Some reached for their bags. Others paused to turn toward her. The lawyer in 1A nodded solemnly. You did good. Elena Rivera walked past, her hand brushing Zariah's shoulder. If you need anything, legal, press advice, even just space, call me. You've already changed something. The mother and daughter from 4D waited until most had gone before approaching. Hi, the woman said softly. I just wanted to say, you handled that with so much grace. My daughter was watching. Thank you. Zariah looked at the girl. Don't let them tell you where you belong, she said. You already know. The girl nodded seriously. Her mother mouthed a thank you, eyes glistening. As the cabin emptied, Linda returned with 2 Orion security agents in plain black suits and earpieces. Ready? She asked. Zariah stood, journal in hand, tablet tucked under her arm. Her legs were steady, her back straight. The walk down the jet bridge was surreal long, echoing, lined with silence. On the other side of the glass wall at the terminal, camera flashes flared like lightning. Security had formed a human barrier between reporters and the private corridor leading to the executive lounge. Zariah barely noticed the shouting. What she noticed, what she felt, was her father. Everett Monroe stood at the end of the hallway, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie loosened, eyes filled with something between fire and sorrow. When Zariah reached him, he didn't speak. He opened his arms and pulled her in. For a moment, that was all that existed. Are you okay? He murmured against her hair. I am now. They sat together in a soundproof lounge while the world outside buzzed like a hive. Everett didn't pace or yell. He sat still, listening to every word his daughter said. She told him everything. Every microaggression, every stare, every denial of her identity. Every moment her voice had been dismissed until it was too loud to ignore. And he listened, not as a CEO, not as a fixer, but as a father. When she finished, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded page. It was a draft of the press statement being finalized by Orion's legal and PR teams. Zariah read it silently. She set it down. "It's good," she said, "but I want to write something too." He tilted his head. "You want to go public?" She nodded. "I didn't choose to be seen, but I was, so I want people to hear it in my voice." Everett didn't question her. He simply said, "Then let's make sure it's heard right." Later that evening, the official Orion Air statement went live. Statement from Zariah Monroe, CEO of Orion Air today. My daughter, Zariah Monroe, a minor and a first-class ticketed passenger on Flight 1175, was unfairly removed from her seat, physically handled, and questioned without cause. This occurred not in some foreign airport, not on an unknown airline, but on ours. The airline I built to connect people with respect, regardless of background. This incident is not only unacceptable, it's personal, and it's emblematic of the kind of systemic bias that must be eradicated, not denied. Orion Air has immediately suspended the staff members involved pending a full investigation. New anti-discrimination training protocols are already underway. We failed our own, and we are listening, because silence is no longer an option. But what truly resonated, what went viral, was the video Zariah posted to her personal page that night. Sitting on a hotel bed, still in her hoodie, with her voice low and clear. She spoke directly into the camera. "I didn't want to speak. I just wanted to fly. But when I was dragged and doubted and dismissed, I realized staying silent doesn't make you safe. I am not brave because I went viral. I'm brave because I didn't let them move me. I'm sharing this not because I'm the CEO's daughter, but because even that didn't protect me. I want a world where no one needs a name to be believed, where showing your ID once is enough, where we don't get asked to cooperate when what they mean is give up. I'm Zariah Monroe. I stayed in my seat, and now I'm standing. For the first time in weeks." Zariah woke up and didn't feel invisible, but she didn't feel victorious either. Her video had hit 3 million views overnight. Messages poured in from every direction: classmates, journalists, celebrities, strangers. The words courage, icon, bravery littered her phone screen like digital confetti, but all Zariah felt was a strange mix of exhaustion and exposure. She was no longer just Zariah Monroe. She had become the girl on the plane. The media had dubbed it the 2A incident. She scrolled briefly through headlines over breakfast in the hotel suite her father had booked near the Orion HQ campus. Teen CEO's daughter faces discrimination at 35,000 feet, Orion under fire. How a viral video sparked airline accountability when belonging requires a last name. Zariah closed her laptop with a sigh. She didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't want to be a trending hashtag. She just wanted to fly without friction. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Linda. She had driven across the city to see Zariah in person. No longer in uniform, she wore a simple navy blouse and jeans. Her hair was pulled back, but her presence carried the same calm authority as on the plane. "I wanted to check on you," she said softly. Zariah hugged her without hesitation. "I don't know what to feel," she admitted, grateful, angry, exhausted, proud, all at once. Linda nodded. That's how healing starts. Messy. Layered. They sat at the small dining table. Linda placed a manila folder on the surface. "What's this?" "Letters," Linda replied, "from other crew members, Orion staff, even a few passengers, people who watch the footage, people who want you to know they saw what you went through and that they believe you." Zariah opened the folder. Dozens of handwritten notes and printed emails spilled out, all addressed to her. Thank you for standing firm. You reminded me of my daughter. I've worked for this airline 12 years. I've seen the quiet kind of discrimination. You made it loud. Your calm shook a system built on silence. Her hands trembled as she read. This wasn't noise, this was resonance. Zariah looked up. I'm still scared. Linda reached across the table. That means you're still human. Later that afternoon, Everett brought her into a boardroom at Orion HQ, where top leadership sat waiting. Legal, communications, HR, PR. Her father at the head of the table, not as her protector, but as the company's voice. Zariah took a seat beside him. A legal advisor began reading the investigation summary. Tanya Blake and Cameron Hale had both been suspended pending formal review. Surveillance footage, in-flight recordings, and passenger statements confirmed misconduct, racial profiling, and failure to follow de-escalation protocols. Internal training gaps had been identified, but Zariah wasn't there to talk discipline. She was there to talk culture. I don't want this to be about me, she began, because if it is, it ends when the next black girl boards a flight and no one knows her last name. Some execs nodded, others looked uncomfortable. I want new onboarding training for all flight crew. I want in-flight bias education. I want anonymous complaint tools that don't get buried in email folders. She paused, looked them all in the eye. And I want this story told in your training videos, not edited, not cleaned up. I want them to see the moment you almost lost me. Her father was the first to speak. We'll do it. Others followed. A new policy was drafted within 24 hours, the Passenger Equity Initiative. Zariah's story would be part of every new hire orientation. Every current employee would be required to undergo implicit bias training before year's end. A direct hotline to corporate inclusion officers was launched. It was a start, not justice, not healing, but a start. That night, back in her hotel room, Zariah lay on her bed, her phone resting on her chest. Amari had sent another message. Amari, I watched your video 5 times. My mom cried. I cried. You didn't just speak. You changed the room, Zariah replied. Zariah, I didn't want to, but the room needed it. She set the phone down, then reached for her journal and wrote, They put me in a seat and tried to pull me out. But when I stayed, I made the seat bigger, not just for me, for the next girl, for the silence breakers, for anyone who's ever been told, you don't belong here. She closed the book. Outside, the San Francisco skyline shimmered under the weight of change. 3 weeks later, Zariah boarded another flight. Same airline, different city, different energy. She stood in the boarding line at Boston Logan International, dressed in her favorite olive green jacket, jeans, and sneakers. Her curls were tucked into a head wrap this time, not to hide, but to honor the version of herself that had survived the storm. She had considered taking another airline, but something in her said go back. Not as a statement, not as a spectacle, just as herself. Her ticket read, Flight 2234, Seat 3A, First Class. As she approached the gate, the attendant smiled warmly. Welcome back, Miss Monroe. No hesitation, no pause, just a welcome. The woman scanned her boarding pass and gestured toward the jet bridge. We're honored to have you with us today. Zariah nodded, offering a soft thank you before walking down the familiar path. Inside the cabin, Deshaun Klein stood near the front, now in the lead attendant uniform. He smiled the moment he saw her. Well, he said, stepping aside. Look who's flying with us today. Didn't think I'd see you again, Zariah replied, sliding into her seat. I requested this flight when I saw your name, he said, then lowered his voice. Figured you deserved a calm one. Zariah settled in, letting her fingers rest on the armrest the same way she had the first time, but with a different posture now. This time, she didn't sit cautiously. She didn't shrink or wonder if she'd have to defend her place. She was the place now. Passengers boarded slowly. No one stared, or, if they did, they smiled. She watched a mother and daughter walk through, hand in hand. Another black girl, young, maybe 10, her hair tied with purple ribbons. Zariah caught the girl's eye. A spark of recognition passed between them. The girl smiled. Zariah smiled back. The plane began to taxi, and she closed her eyes as the engines roared to life. The ground fell away beneath her again, but this time, she didn't feel like she was bracing for impact. She felt like she was rising on her terms. Somewhere over Pennsylvania, Deshawn returned with a small envelope. "From the captain," he said, handing it to her discreetly. Zariah opened it slowly. A handwritten note inside Miss Monroe. "On behalf of this crew, thank you for reminding us what it means to fly with dignity. You didn't just change policy, you changed hearts. We're better because of your seat in our story." Captain Ray Cho Zariah's throat tightened. She folded the letter neatly and tucked it inside her journal. When the plane touched down in Atlanta hours later, there were no cameras, no press, no trending hashtags, just passengers gathering bags, light conversation, the familiar chime of arrival. Zariah stepped off the plane with her head high and heart light. As she entered the terminal, she spotted a billboard for Orion Air's new inclusion initiative. Every seat has a story. It featured silhouettes, not faces, of passengers young and old, and the tagline, "We don't just carry people, we carry their truth." She stopped and stared for a moment, not for herself, but for what it meant that it was there. A few days later, Zariah stood in front of a podium at a local youth summit. Her father had been asked to speak, but he had deferred. "My daughter's the one they need to hear from," he'd told the organizers. So she spoke. No script, just her journal in her hands. She shared what it felt like to be doubted for existing, to be tested over and over for simply claiming space. She spoke of the bruise, the cameras, the moment she almost shrank, but didn't. And she ended with this, "I don't want to be remembered because I was the daughter of a CEO. I want to be remembered because I stayed seated when I was told to move. Because that seat, it wasn't just for me. It was for the next girl who gets told she's not enough. The next kid who gets looked at sideways because they don't match someone's idea of first class. If I did anything worth remembering, I hope it's this: I stayed. And I made room." The room stood to its feet. And in the crowd, the little girl with purple ribbons from the flight clapped the loudest. She boarded quietly. She stayed calm. She was doubted, dismissed, and then she stood. Zariah Monroe's story is not just a viral headline, it's a mirror. It reflects the quiet bias that travels beside us every day, the bruises we hide to keep the peace, the seats we're told we don't belong in, unless we have a name powerful enough to force recognition. But Zariah didn't fight back with noise. She fought back by staying in place. She reminded the world that justice should never require a surname to be valid. Her story calls out injustice, yes, but it also calls us to be better, to listen sooner, to believe more easily, to make room without being asked. So if this story moved you, if you felt her pain, her strength, her quiet defiance like this video, share it with someone who still believes in fairness, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, uplift, and reveal the power of standing your ground when others try to move you. We'll be back with another story soon. Until then, stay aware, stay kind, stay seated in your truth.